The conference chamber on Hegemony Station hummed with the usual arrogance that Ambassador Kael'thon had perfected over 3 centuries of diplomatic service. His 4 eyes gazed dismissively at the holographic display showing Earth's latest transmission, another pathetic attempt at meaningful contact from the third rock orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. "Commander Park Min-ho of Earth's United Space Command," Kael'thon read aloud, his translator rendering the human's words with mechanical precision. They still insist on these military titles for what amounts to barely organized tribal warfare. His subordinates chittered in amusement, their crystalline exoskeletons catching the ambient light of the station's core. Park Min-ho sat in his cramped office aboard orbital station Sejong, watching the delayed response from the hegemony with growing frustration. 3 weeks to receive a reply, and it was the same condescending nonsense about humanity's eventual potential and primitive but charming attempts at spaceflight. He crushed the disposable coffee cup in his hand, the cheap plastic giving way with a satisfying crack. "Sir, we're receiving another batch of their educational materials," reported Lieutenant Shin Yu-jin from the communications array. The young officer's voice carried the same bitter edge that had infected the entire human diplomatic corps over the past 5 years of failed contact attempts. The materials were always the same. Basic physics lessons that human children learned in elementary school, mathematical concepts that humanity had mastered centuries ago, and gentle suggestions that humans focus on achieving planetary peace before attempting to join galactic civilization. The implication was clear. Stay in your sandbox until the adults decide you're ready. What the Galactic Confederation failed to understand was that humanity had been listening to their communications for decades. Human intelligence services had cracked their basic encryption protocols within months of first contact, revealing the casual contempt with which Earth was discussed in their official reports. Terms like evolutionary dead end, aggressive primitives, and potential future servants appeared regularly in classified Confederation documents. Commander Park had spent sleepless nights studying those intercepted transmissions, learning about the vast galactic civilization that saw his species as nothing more than clever animals. The Confederation spanned 12,000 star systems, encompassing 47 different species, each more technologically advanced than humanity's best achievements. Their smallest patrol craft could obliterate Earth's entire space fleet without breaking hyperspace formation. The irony burned deepest when Park read about the Confederation's peace doctrine, their proud claim of having eliminated warfare from civilized space through superior technology and diplomatic wisdom. They had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival, to adapt or die, to face an enemy that wanted nothing less than complete annihilation. That complacency would prove fatal when the deep space monitoring stations at the galactic rim detected the first Veltar scouts. The ancient Veltar Empire had been sleeping in the galactic core for 10 millennia, their vast technological civilization preserved in stasis while they waited for the galaxy to mature into something worthy of conquest. When they finally awakened, their emergence sent shockwaves through subspace that reached every corner of known space. Captain Lee Da-eun was pulling another boring shift at Lunar Base when the emergency broadcasts began flooding in from the core. Worlds. Her coffee went cold as she watched the impossible unfold on her tactical displays. Hegemony Prime, the most heavily defended world in the Confederation, had fallen in less than 6 hours. The attackers hadn't even bothered with siege tactics. They had simply appeared in orbit and begun converting the planet's population into something else entirely. The Veltar ships defied every known law of physics. They phased through solid matter, materialized inside enemy formations, and shrugged off weapons that could crack moons. Their crews were no longer entirely organic. Millennia of technological integration had transformed them into living machines that thought with cold, perfect logic. World after world fell to the advancing Veltar fleets. Quantum barriers that had protected Confederation worlds for centuries proved as effective as tissue paper. Plasma cannons that could vaporize asteroids barely scratched the hulls of Veltar warships. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations were being systematically harvested like crops. The panic spread faster than the invasion itself. Confederation fleets that had never known defeat found themselves completely outmatched. their crews paralyzed by the realization that their technological superiority meant nothing against enemies who treated the laws of physics as mere suggestions. As the Rim worlds prepared for evacuation, desperate Confederation commanders began plotting retreat routes toward the galactic backwaters, those insignificant systems they had always ignored. Systems like Sol, where a primitive species called humanity continued their quaint experiments with chemical rockets and nuclear weapons. Captain Lee watched the approaching refugee fleet with grim satisfaction. The same aliens who had dismissed humanity as barely sentient were now fleeing desperately toward human space, hoping that their primitive neighbors might offer sanctuary. The hunter had become the hunted, and Earth was about to become the galaxy's last hope. The first wave of Confederation ships arrived like a swarm of injured insects, their once proud hulls scarred and smoking from hasty escapes. Admiral Kim Tae-jin stood on the observation deck of Earth Defense Command, watching thousands of alien vessels crowd into Sol System's outer perimeter. Some were massive dreadnoughts limping on failing engines, others were tiny evacuation pods crammed with survivors from dead worlds. "Sir, we're receiving over 40,000 separate distress signals," reported Communications Officer Park Hae-won, her voice strained from hours of coordinating the chaos. "They're requesting immediate sanctuary, medical assistance, and protection." The word tasted bitter in Kim's mouth. These same aliens had spent 5 years treating humanity like ignorant children, and now they came begging for shelter. His military advisors were furious, especially General Cho Sang-wook, who had endured countless humiliating diplomatic sessions where alien ambassadors lectured humans about their primitive, aggressive tendencies. "Admiral, we should turn them away," growled Colonel Bae Min-ho, his weathered face twisted with old anger. "Let them face the same contempt they showed us." But Kim was a strategist first, and revenge was a luxury they couldn't afford. "Negative. We grant them sanctuary, but on our terms. Full access to their technology, complete intelligence sharing, and they follow our defense protocols." The refugee processing began immediately. Alien ships were assigned parking orbits around Jupiter and Saturn, while smaller vessels were directed to Earth's orbital stations. The sight was surreal. Crystalline hegemony cruisers sharing space with organic Zephyrian bioships, all of them refugees from the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. Dr. Choi Soo-bin barely slept for the first week coordinating the massive scientific exchange program. Her teams worked around the clock, reverse engineering alien technology, while trying to understand how species that had conquered the stars could be so thoroughly defeated. The aliens, meanwhile, were horrified by what they learned about human capabilities. "These weapons are monstrous," whispered Zalvan, a hegemony scientist whose pale blue skin had gone even paler after reviewing human military files. His forearms trembled as he gestured at the holographic display showing a nuclear warhead's detonation pattern. "You deliberately create radiation that poisons entire regions?" Lieutenant Colonel Yoon Jae-min, the human liaison for the weapons exchange program, simply smiled coldly. "We call it area denial, very effective against large formations." The cultural shock went both directions. Human engineers were amazed by alien medical technology that could regrow lost limbs in hours, while alien doctors were appalled by human surgical techniques that actually cut into bodies with sharp instruments. The aliens had energy shields that could stop plasma bolts, but they had no defense against simple bullets or chemical explosives. Captain Han Ji-won led the tactical exchange sessions, where human military doctrine met alien strategic thinking. The results were explosive. Confederation military commanders, accustomed to elegant fleet formations and honorable single combat, couldn't comprehend human concepts like suicide attacks, guerrilla warfare, or deliberate targeting of enemy morale. "Your species fights like animals," stammered Commander Vexnil, a veteran of 100 Confederation campaigns. "There are no rules, no honor in your methods." "Honor doesn't win wars," replied Han coldly. "Survival does." The most shocking revelation came when human intelligence officers began analyzing captured Veltar technology. The ancient empire's weapons were incredibly advanced, but they followed predictable patterns. Their shields adapted to energy frequencies, their tactics were mathematically perfect, and their crews fought with clockwork precision. "They're too perfect," observed Major Song Yunji during a briefing with refugee fleet commanders. 10,000 years of technological evolution, but they've eliminated chaos from their thinking. They can't adapt to unpredictable attacks. The alien commanders exchanged worried glances. Their entire military philosophy was based on technological superiority and predictable escalation. The idea of deliberately introducing chaos into battle tactics was literally incomprehensible to them. Everything changed when the deep space sensors detected the approaching Veltar scout fleet. 3 massive vessels, each the size of a small moon, materialized at the edge of the system. Their hulls seemed to phase in and out of reality, making them nearly impossible to target with conventional weapons. Panic swept through the refugee fleet. Confederation commanders who had hoped for a respite from the nightmare realized that their doom had followed them to humanity's doorstep. Some began preparing to surrender. Others discussed fleeing deeper into the galactic rim. But Admiral Kim had been preparing for this moment since the first refugee ship arrived. Earth's defense grid activated with mechanical precision. Orbital platforms that had been dismissed as quaint by alien visitors suddenly revealed their true nature. Hidden weapon systems came online, while human ships that looked crude compared to alien vessels began moving into attack formations. "All ships, this is Admiral Kim," his voice broadcast across every frequency. "We've spent 5 years listening to lectures about our primitive ways. Today we show the galaxy what primitives can do when backed into a corner." The Veltar scouts, expecting easy prey, were about to encounter something their perfect algorithms had never calculated: humanity's beautiful chaos unleashed in defense of their home. The Veltar main fleet arrived with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. 27 massive warships materialized in perfect formation at the edge of Sol System, their hulls rippling with energy fields that bent light around them. Each vessel was a kilometer long, covered in organic-looking armor that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The fleet's appearance triggered every proximity alarm in human space. Hierarch Zexthul observed the system from his command throne, his cybernetic implants analyzing the primitive defenses with cold amusement. 10,000 years of slumber had ended, with a galaxy-spanning conquest, and this backwater system would fall like all the others. His tactical computers had already calculated the optimal attack vectors, the precise energy requirements for planetary sterilization, and the estimated time for complete subjugation: 4 hours and 17 minutes. What happened next shattered every assumption in the Veltar database. The human fleet didn't form battle lines. Instead, they scattered like startled fish, using the asteroid belt as cover while launching seemingly random attacks from impossible angles. Captain Song Hyejin's destroyer, Sol's Fury, came screaming out of Jupiter's shadow, engines burning, at dangerous overload levels, as she aimed directly at the Veltar command cruiser. "All hands brace for impact," Song shouted into her comm system. Her crew of 43 humans had volunteered for what every tactical computer said was certain: suicide. The Veltar cruiser's adaptive shields flickered to life, designed to deflect energy weapons and absorb kinetic impacts from sophisticated alien projectiles. They weren't designed for a human destroyer filled with nuclear warheads and chemical explosives. Piloted by a captain who had grown up watching war movies about kamikaze attacks, the collision sent shockwaves through space. The Veltar cruiser's shields held for exactly 0.3 seconds before the raw kinetic energy overwhelmed their adaptive matrices. Song's ship punched through the alien hull like a bullet through paper, her crew already moving to boarding positions before the debris stopped flying. "Move, move, move!" bellowed Sergeant Kim Do-hyun as his Marine squad poured through the breach. They carried weapons that would have made Confederation soldiers gasp in horror: shotguns loaded with explosive shells, flamethrowers that burned at 3,000 degrees, and grenades filled with white phosphorus that stuck to everything it touched. The Veltar crew, accustomed to elegant energy duels and sophisticated defensive systems, found themselves facing chainsaw-wielding maniacs who seemed to enjoy close combat. Their perfect cybernetic reflexes meant nothing against humans who fought with unpredictable fury, using tactics that no civilized species would even consider. Major Nam Gi-ho led Alpha Company through the cruiser's main corridors, his flamethrower, painting the walls with liquid fire. The Veltar warriors, part organic and part machine, had never encountered weapons that attacked both flesh and circuitry simultaneously. Their adaptive armor could deflect plasma bolts and absorb energy bursts, but it couldn't stop chemical flames that ate through metal like acid. "Target the junction points!" Nam roared, watching his Marines use breaching charges to destroy the elegant curves of Veltar architecture. Each explosion sent the alien crew into deeper confusion. Their tactical computers couldn't process warfare that deliberately destroyed valuable infrastructure, that chose chaos over precision. The space battle raged around them as more human ships launched impossible attacks. Lieutenant Colonel Park Jae-sung's fighter squadron dove through the middle of the Veltar formation, their primitive missiles somehow penetrating shields that had stopped the Confederation's most advanced weapons. The secret was embarrassingly simple. Human missiles were too crude to be recognized as threats by the alien defense systems. Commander Lee Soo-young's heavy cruiser, Busan Thunder, demonstrated another human innovation that left the Veltar speechless. Instead of engaging in honorable ship-to-ship combat, she used her vessel as a battering ram, deliberately ramming smaller Veltar vessels while her crew fired nuclear-tipped torpedoes at point-blank range. The psychological impact was devastating. Veltar crews, who had conquered the galaxy through technological superiority and mathematical precision, found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to operate on pure chaos. Human ships attacked from unexpected angles, used debris as weapons, and deliberately sacrificed themselves to damage larger targets. Captain Yu Min-ah's corvette, Daegu Striker, proved that human creativity knew no bounds. She loaded her cargo, with scrap metal and industrial mining explosives, then flew directly into a Veltar battleship's hangar bay. The resulting explosion destroyed the alien vessel's fighter complement and left a hole big enough to fly a frigate through. The Confederation refugee fleet watched in stunned silence as humanity's primitive tactics began taking their toll. Veltar ships, designed to counter sophisticated energy weapons and predictable attack patterns, found themselves vulnerable to simple kinetic weapons and chemical explosives. Hierarch Zex Thul's perfect confidence began to crack as casualty reports flooded his command center. 3 cruisers destroyed, 2 battleships severely damaged, and hundreds of Veltar warriors dead or missing. The humans were using weapons and tactics that hadn't been seen in civilized space for millennia. For the first time since Awakening, the Veltar Empire faced an enemy that fought without rules, without honor, and without fear of mutual destruction. The turning point came when Lieutenant Kim Sora discovered something the Veltar had never experienced in 10 millennia of conquest. Pure weaponized chaos broadcast directly into their cybernetic minds. Her psychological warfare unit had been experimenting with captured Veltar communication frequencies, trying to understand how their hybrid organic machine crews coordinated attacks. What they found was terrifying in its simplicity. The Veltar had eliminated all uncertainty from their thinking processes. Their minds operated like perfect computers, processing information through logical pathways that had been refined over thousands of years. They couldn't handle paradoxes, contradictions, or illogical data streams. "Broadcast this on all Veltar frequencies," Kim ordered her technicians, uploading a data packet that would have made human philosophers weep. It contained every logical paradox humanity had ever discovered: the liar's paradox, infinite loops, mathematical impossibilities, and recursive problems that had no solutions. The effect was immediate and devastating. Veltar crews began experiencing something their species had forgotten existed: confusion. Their perfect minds, confronted with unsolvable problems, began overheating their cybernetic implants. Some warriors simply froze in place, their consciousness trapped in infinite loops, trying to resolve contradictions that couldn't be resolved. Captain Jang Hyun-woo's fighter squadron struck while the enemy was paralyzed, their crude missiles, punching through Veltar shields that were still trying to calculate the logical impossibilities flooding their systems. His pilots whooped with savage joy as they watched ancient warships drift helplessly through space, their crews lost in mental mazes of their own making. Colonel Beiji Wan saw the opportunity and seized it with both hands. Her special operations teams launched boarding pods filled with soldiers who had trained for exactly this kind of nightmare scenario. They weren't carrying sophisticated weapons, just simple tools that worked regardless of alien shields or energy fields. "Remember, these things think like computers," Bay told her troops as they prepared to breach a disabled Veltar cruiser. "Hit them with something they can't calculate, something that doesn't make sense." Her Marines carried weapons that would have horrified the Confederation: sawed-off shotguns, crowbars, industrial chainsaws, and canisters of corrosive acid. But they also carried something more dangerous: the human capacity for creative violence that followed no rules the Veltar could understand. The boarding action was brutal and one-sided. Veltar warriors, still struggling with the logical paradoxes scrambling their minds, found themselves facing humans who fought with tools instead of weapons, who used maintenance shafts as attack routes, and who seemed to take sadistic pleasure in destroying beautiful alien technology with crude implements. Sergeant Lim Dong-hyun's squad captured the cruiser's command center by crawling through the ventilation system and dropping smoke grenades filled with industrial solvents. The Veltar crew, choking on fumes that their environmental suits couldn't filter, surrendered without firing a shot. The intelligence they gathered changed everything. The captured Veltar officers, subjected to interrogation techniques that made their Confederation allies sick to their stomachs, revealed the fatal flaw in their empire's design. 10,000 years of technological perfection had eliminated every trace of adaptability from their thinking. "They can't improvise," Colonel Bay reported to Admiral Kim during an emergency briefing. "Their minds are like advanced computers, incredibly powerful, but only when processing expected inputs. Hit them with something their databases don't recognize, and they crash." Commander Oh Min-seo put this knowledge to devastating use at Mars Station, where a massive Veltar assault fleet was approaching with mathematical precision. Instead of meeting them with organized defenses, she scattered nuclear mines in seemingly random patterns throughout the asteroid belt, each one programmed to detonate based on unpredictable variables: solar wind fluctuations, cosmic ray impacts, even random number generators. The Veltar fleet, approaching in perfect formation, tried to calculate safe passage through the minefield. Their tactical computers worked feverishly to identify the pattern, to predict when and where the explosives would detonate. They never realized that there was no pattern to find. When the mines began exploding in completely random sequences, the Veltar formation dissolved into chaos. Ships collided with each other, trying to avoid explosions that couldn't be predicted, while their crews struggled to comprehend warfare that deliberately embraced uncertainty. Captain No Yoon-ji's rail gun batteries on Mars Station opened fire, while the enemy was still reeling from the random explosions. The crude kinetic projectiles, accelerated to significant fractions of light speed, punched through Veltar armor that had been designed to deflect sophisticated energy weapons. Each impact sent alien warships tumbling end over end, their perfect stability systems unable to compensate for damage they couldn't calculate in advance. The massacre at Mars Station sent shockwaves through the Veltar command structure. For the first time since their awakening, they were retreating from a battle. Their perfect tactical algorithms, honed through millennia of conquest, simply couldn't process an enemy that fought without logic, without predictable patterns, without any regard for the mathematical elegance of warfare. Throughout the Sol system, human forces pressed their advantage with increasingly creative attacks. They used garbage as projectile weapons, turned merchant vessels into improvised bombs, and coordinated strikes using communication codes based on old Earth songs that drove Veltar translation systems insane. The tide of the Galactic War was turning, and it was turning because humanity had weaponized the one thing the Veltar had eliminated from their perfect civilization: beautiful, chaotic, utterly unpredictable human madness. The Veltar command fortress hung in space like a metallic cancer. its surface crawling with biomechanical defenses that had evolved over 10 millennia. The massive structure was the size of Earth's moon, bristling with weapons that could sterilize entire star systems and shields that had never been penetrated by any known force in the galaxy. Admiral Kim stood on the bridge of the hastily converted battleship Incheon's Pride, studying the tactical displays with grim satisfaction. Around him, the combined human Confederation fleet prepared for what would either be the greatest victory in galactic history or the most spectacular suicide mission ever attempted. All units, this is Admiral Kim, his voice carried across every frequency, to ships carrying warriors from dozens of different species. Today we end this war, not with superior technology, not with ancient wisdom, but with something our enemies never learned, the will to adapt or die. The attack began with controlled chaos that would have made military historians weep. Human. Ships loaded with nuclear warheads dove straight at the fortress's main shields, their pilots screaming battle cries in languages the Veltar couldn't translate. At the same time, Confederation vessels unleashed coordinated plasma barrages from angles the fortress's computers said were impossible. Captain Park Sun-mi's fighter squadron demonstrated humanity's gift for creative destruction by weaponizing space debris. Her pilots had strapped rocket engines to chunks of asteroid, creating improvised missiles that the fortress's defensive systems couldn't identify as threats. The random impacts disrupted the ancient structure's perfect defensive patterns. But the real breakthrough came when human engineers revealed their secret weapon. They had spent weeks reverse engineering captured Veltar technology and combining it with their own crude but effective innovations. The result was weapons that shouldn't have existed, that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Lieutenant Colonel Kwon Jae-hyuk's bomber wing showcased this hybrid technology with devastating effect. Their missiles carried Confederation energy cores wrapped in human nuclear warheads, creating explosions that phased through the fortress's shields before detonating inside its armor. Each impact sent shockwaves through the massive structure, causing systems failures that the Veltar's perfect minds couldn't comprehend. The fortress's return fire was mathematically precise, but ultimately ineffective. Its weapons were designed to target ships that followed predictable flight paths that adhered to the logical patterns of civilized warfare. Human pilots, trained in the beautiful chaos of atmospheric combat, twisted through space in patterns that defied every tactical algorithm in the Veltar database. Commander Seo Dongwon's assault cruiser, Gwangju Thunder, proved that human engineering could turn any tool into a weapon. His ship had been a civilian mining vessel just months ago, but human ingenuity had transformed it into a floating arsenal. Industrial cutting lasers became ship killers, mining charges became torpedoes, and cargo holds became launch bays for improvised fighters. The breakthrough came when Captain Han So-young's boarding teams found a way inside the fortress. While Confederation forces hammered the main defenses, her Marines used something the Veltar had never encountered: simple, crude explosives that worked regardless of shields or energy fields. "Breaching charges, go!" Han shouted as her teams blasted through hull plating that had withstood plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes. The fortress's internal defenses, designed to counter sophisticated energy weapons, were useless against humans carrying shotguns and flamethrowers. The interior battle was a nightmare of corridor fighting that showcased everything the galaxy had forgotten about warfare. Veltar warriors, their minds still reeling from the logical paradoxes that human psychological warfare had implanted, found themselves facing soldiers who fought with chainsaw bayonets and explosive crossbow bolts. Sergeant Moon Tae-ho's squad cleared the fortress's command center, using weapons that would have made their Confederation allies sick: flamethrowers that burned at temperatures hot enough to melt alien alloys, acid grenades that ate through cybernetic implants, and simple crowbars that proved surprisingly effective against creatures who had forgotten what it meant to be afraid. The Veltar hierarch, Zaxthul the Eternal, faced defeat for the first time in his species' recorded history. The ancient ruler, his cybernetic implants sparking from overload, stared in bewilderment at the primitive human who had captured him. Captain Han's armor was scorched, her weapons crude, but her eyes held something the hierarch had never seen before, the wild satisfaction of a predator who had just brought down prey that everyone said was impossible to kill. "How?" the hierarch whispered, his voice a mixture of organic vocal cords and mechanical synthesizers. "Our empire has conquered 1,000 galaxies. Our technology is 10,000 years beyond yours." Han smiled coldly, her flamethrower still smoking. "That's exactly the problem. You forgot how to fight dirty." The aftermath of the battle sent shockwaves through galactic civilization. The Veltar Empire, invincible for millennia, had been broken by a species that still used chemical rockets and nuclear weapons. The Confederation's Emergency Council offered humanity immediate membership in their High Council, complete with voting rights and territorial concessions. But humanity's response surprised everyone. Ambassador Li Minjung stood before the assembled representatives of galactic civilization and proposed something revolutionary: a new alliance structure where every species' unique approach to warfare would be valued, where technological superiority wouldn't determine diplomatic status. "We don't want to rule the galaxy," Li explained to the stunned assembly. "We want to make sure it can defend itself. The next time something like the Veltar awakens, we'll be ready, not because we have the best weapons, but because we know how to adapt when our best weapons fail." The proposal passed unanimously. The galaxy had learned that the most primitive species sometimes possessed the most advanced understanding of survival, adaptation, and the terrible mathematics of war. The end.